Welcome to Pixel Pizza,
Did she say pizza?
your ultimate source for chiptunes, video game talk, and pepperoni. Delivered to you from Los Angeles and into the digital cyberspace of the 2020s.
Pizza power!
That's right, one super giant pizza.
I want a large, thick crust with double cheese, ham, pepperoni. Hey, where's my pizza? Pizza time.
Welcome back to the Pixel Pizza Podcast, everybody. You just listened to our chiptune artist of the week, PICE, and that track was called Start Game. So hope you dug that one. And now we are here with our game industry interview guest for the week. Today's guest has worked on games including A Dance of Fire and Ice and the award-winning Rhythm Doctor. This is the co-lead at 7th Beat Games, Kyle Labriola. How are you doing, Kyle?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Kyle, when in your life did you know you wanted to work in games?
I feel like for me, there was not even really a moment where I consciously decided that. I always tell people I kind of fell backwards into it on accident. I had intended to pursue like art and animation and things like that. And then the games things were all kind of on the side. And then sort of like a frog being slowly boiled, suddenly I was like, oh, I'm a game developer. And it actually took me sort of years to even admit that out loud to myself or anything like that. When I was a little kid, I was really into comics and things like that. That was kind of my first passion. When I first kind of got my hands on a computer, I started using like pixel art from video games to make my own little sprite comics using like Mega Man and
Oh, I
Zelda.
did that too.
Yeah. It was such a great way to like express yourself as a
It
kid. You don't have to
was.
draw or anything like that. So that was my first kind of experimentation with being creative and sharing it on the internet and things like that. And then eventually I was like, oh, I should learn to draw so I can draw my own comics and things like that. Then by the time I got to high school, I was trying to decide where I wanted to, go to college or what I wanted to pursue. And over time, I knew that I wanted to do something creative. I wasn't really sure what I wanted it to be. Could be, illustration or comics or animation. And then, I was doing these comics on the side and I was very interested in playing video games, but I never considered that game development was an actual viable career option. Around the time that I graduated high school in around 2012. And then around that time, maybe a little bit later, is when there was this big sort of Xbox Live Arcade and Steam boom of Super Meat Boy and Braid and Castle Crashers and all these different things. And that really kind of put the idea of indie games on my radar because before that, I would play like Flash games in my browser as a kid and stuff like that, but I never really thought about who's making these and how do you do it or anything like that. So that was probably when the seed of the idea was kind of planted, was watching that documentary Indie Game the Movie that was about Super Meat Boy and all these different things. But in my brain, I was like, oh, but that other people do that, but that could never be me. That's this like pie in the sky, making video games in your own house and stuff like that. I didn't think it was for me or that it would be like a plausible thing to try to do. So then ended up going to school for art and was pursuing animation, thinking that I was going to get a job at like a Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, things like that. But meanwhile, sort of the passion for games kind of stayed on the back burner and was kind of like a constant in my life. And then we can get more into it, but long story short, after I graduated, I was reached out to by the lead designer of Rhythm Doctor and A Dance Fire and Ice. His name is Hafiz Osman. And I was just a fan of he had his games up as Flash games, and I was a fan of them, and we were talking back and forth. And then eventually he asked me if I wanted to help him work on these projects. And then, we weren't really getting paid or anything. We were just kind of doing it as a passion. Fast forward a few years later, started, selling the games, and then years after that, I was like, okay, I guess I'm a game developer. I didn't really set out to do it, but now it's like it's what I do full time, and I
Mm,
kind of like moved up in the company so, in a sense, and now here I am.
that's amazing. I know before Seventh Beat, you did some animation for Jackbox games. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was kind of part of my process. It was around the time that I was graduating with an animation degree. And I initially went to a school in New York called the Rochester Institute of Technology, and then I
Mm.
transferred to a school in California called the California College of the Arts, going for a animation BFA. And I was a fan of the Jackbox party packs and stuff like that. And I saw that they had a posting where you could work as a remote animator. So that was kind of my first big attempt to get a job. I was sending out other portfolios to Nickelodeon, things like that, and getting all these rejections. And then I did the Jackbox test. They had an application and a test, so sort of animation test, and I didn't get it the first time. But the animation director gave me this really great, sincere feedback on like, hey, we really loved it. It was almost there. Maybe try to like consider these things if you do it next time. And then I actually did do it again when they were looking, and I got taken on. That was a really fun experience. I got to work as a remote sort of animator for like a summer job.
Mm.
And I did that. I did that 3 summers in a row on a Jackbox Party Packs 5, 6, and 7. And that's pretty much my only other professional game dev experience other than the company that I helped run was just doing this one little thing. And seeing how they kind of managed everything and how they had their sort of art workflow was very illuminating for me because on the side I have to kind of like help make all these decisions
Sure.
as a co-lead. So seeing how a more established company does it was scary, but also very educational.
Yeah, no, one of my very first guests on the show was Owen Watson
Yeah,
from
yep.
Jackbox. And I remember he talked a lot about their process over there and how unique it was.
Yeah, and their process, it was probably good for me in a sense because I've never worked at like a huge AAA company, but Jackbox is kind of what you would call like a double A or kind of halfway between an indie game and a AAA game. And
Mm.
when they make the party packs, they split into even smaller teams. So like on each individual game in the pack, it's like a team of like 7 people or something like that. So um, I think that kind of helped it not be as intimidating as it could have been if I was thrown into like a
Oh,
300
yeah.
person team or something like that. So that had a very natural sort of cartoony energy to it that I think I was a good fit for.
Yeah, because you had already been pursuing like traditional animation, and that was very close to the vibe that they do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a lot of they have different art styles for different games in the packs, and a lot of
Mm.
it kind of aligned with how I was drawing in my own comics and sketchbooks anyway. So I was like, I was getting all these rejections from these other places, and then like my little kernel of confidence was like, I think I can get this Jackbox thing. Like, the competition is going to be tough, just like the competition is tough for like Disney, Pixar, Nickelodeon. But I'm
Of
like,
course.
I know games. I draw the way that they would want you to draw to work on the team. Like I'm like, I think I can get this, and I'm glad that I kept going, even though I got that first sort of
Yeah,
rejection, and then I came back being like, hey, I've been working harder, and here's my even better attempt at the animation test, and that kind of sealed it for me.
exactly. I think that's such an important lesson because it's so easy to, once you get a rejection once, to just move on. But I mean, especially the fact that they took the time to give you that feedback was amazing, and that you stuck with it and tried again and got those results was, it's definitely important and great.
Yeah, and like those rejections I was getting from the more like TV and movie studios, after a while they were kind of wearing down on me and
Mm.
like, I know other people who, if that's their dream, they would stick to it and, keep running up against that as many times as it takes. And for me, it just kind of kept wearing down my motivation. And then I kept questioning, like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to work in film? Do I really want to work in TV? Um, and I kept sort of broadening the scope of my applications. I was like, okay, how about like preschool educational app, or what about like a casino app? Just like broadening my scope of like, oh, I just want to, I just graduated, so I'm like, I want a job anywhere,
Yeah.
anywhere. Um, And then as I sort of was losing steam on that, I had to do something for money, so I started freelancing. And that was fun in its own way. And I was doing all these like paid commissions for people, whether it's like, oh, I want like my Dungeons and Dragons character drawn, or I want this fan art, or I was doing a lot of work for small businesses and streamers and YouTubers and stuff like that. They need like YouTube thumbnails or they need like a banner drawn. So I was doing
Right.
that, and that was kind of my primary job. But that also got very exhausting, and I also sort of started experiencing a lot of artistic burnout from doing that over and over again. Obviously, I had to do it to sort
Of
of
course.
pay rent and things like that. But that was why when I was doing that at the same time as working on these game things, I didn't want to get my hopes up that game development was like a thing that could be my career because I was like, well, that's only one part of it. I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket. Um, and I don't want to tell anyone that I'm a game developer. I don't want to tell myself I'm a game developer. I just want to keep, spreading out and doing all these freelance things. And then once our first kind of commercial game, A Dance Fire and Ice, came out, eventually the money I was making from that started to completely eclipse all these other freelance things I was doing. So eventually I was like, okay, I should just cut off all this other stuff that's stressing me out and just pour myself 100% into 7th Beat games, and that was what I decided to do.
Mm. And that was the moment where you fully felt like you could call yourself a game developer?
Even then, I feel like it took like another 2 years before that was like my answer to anyone, whether it's like a family member or if you like go to the doctor or something and they ask, "Oh, what do you do?" I would always say, "Oh, I'm a freelance artist. I do all this like graphic design or animation for clients." I was very kind of sheepish about it.
Mm.
But then after like a few years of only doing games full time, wake up, go to bed, only doing games, I'm like, well, at this point, I'm a game developer. And as someone who doesn't do programming, I feel like that also is making me a little self-conscious because I was like, oh, well, I don't program the games, so can I really call myself a game developer? And then I had to sort of get over that.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I love doing about this show is that game developers come from all sorts of disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I don't really think it's a debate, but sort of the question of who gets to call themselves a game developer? Do the artists call themselves a developer? Do the community management people, the PR, the
Right.
social media? I have a pretty kind of broad umbrella of who I would consider, a part of the team. I think, if you're helping make the game or run the team or get the word out about the game, then I would say you're a part of the team.
Totally.
And, and I think most people would probably agree with that. But I think when you tell someone that you make games, they immediately assume that you're a programmer.
Yeah, if they're not in the industry or not tuned in, I
Right.
can see how they would come to that conclusion.
Yeah. It was just funny how I sort of achieved a dream that I almost wasn't giving myself the permission to even believe. When I was saw those games, Castle Crashers, Super Meat Boy coming out, I was like,
Yeah,
oh, that would never be me. I don't do that. I don't know anything about programming. I'm just going to stay in my lane. And then eventually, and I've heard a lot of other stories from other people where they sort of end up in this unintentionally. They didn't set out to like take classes or they didn't set out to like major in this or anything like that. And then you just make connections and make friends with people, and then suddenly you're there doing it.
yeah. No, it's definitely I can relate to that knowing sort of falling backwards into what you end up doing, but then loving it.
Definitely.
So, when was that sort of first connection made that got you involved with Seventh Beat?
Yeah, so I think it was around 2013, is when Hoppus released Rhythm Doctor as a Flash game, which we can now consider kind of like a very small prototype of Rhythm Doctor, onto Flash websites like Newgrounds and Congregate and itch.io and all these different places where you could play games for free. And I had sort of stumbled on that, around the time of high school graduation, and I was just a fan. I just liked the games, I liked playing them. Um, and he had like a little forum thread available where you could kind of give bug reports and feedback. And I started, saying, "Oh, I think this is too hard," or "Oh, this is how it worked for me," and giving all this feedback. And eventually we just got in touch and we followed each other on Twitter and things like that. And then a few years later, he had made another game called Dance Fire and Ice in Flash for a game jam. And eventually he wanted to sort of flesh it out. He had made that version on his own. He wanted to like give it more music, more art. And he was in college in 2015, and then I was in college at the same time. He was in college in the UK, and there was a student game competition called Dare to Be Digital in the UK. And basically, it was just college students making games, sort of like a 1 month game jam competition, and then like awards given at the end. And they let you work remotely as long as the other people were in college.
Oh,
That was the only requirement. I was shocked that they allowed college students from totally different countries team up.
yeah.
So Hafiz was looking for people to team up with him, and because I was sort of a mutual follow on Twitter who liked to do art and stuff like that, he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna reach out to Kyle because he's an artist I know, and I want someone to like redraw these assets." So he reached out to me, and I was like, "Sure." Like, again, not thinking that any career thing would come of it, just that
Yeah.
I just recently learned what game jams even were at that time, and I never done one. So I was like, this will be really fun. This is a designer that I really look up to and I am friendly with, and this will be a really fun opportunity. So we had that sort of 1 month kind of jam, and that was kind of my first formal involvement in what would later become Seventh Beat Games. I don't even think he had formed a company at that point. And we had a super fun time. People loved A Dance Fire and Ice at the game jam. And, part of me thought like, oh, that was it. Like that was just one little episode of my life and nothing's going to come of that. And it was just
Yeah.
a fun college experience. But then after I graduated and Hafiz graduated, he had decided to try to pursue this full time on his own. And he was focusing on Rhythm Doctor. And he was like, the goal was to make Rhythm Doctor this full game that was going to come out on Steam. So he formed this company, and he was working with his friend Winston, who was the person doing all the pixel art. And then our lead programmer, Yakumo, who lives in Peru, joined remotely and sort of took over kind of programming the full version. And then when I graduated, he asked like, "Hey, we need some help with like community management, Discord moderation, social media, making promo art." He was like, it was so fun working with you on Dance Fire and Ice. Is there any way you would be interested in helping with Rhythm Doctor or like joining the team officially? Like, to be totally frank, the pay was very low at the time because it was all just like shoestring budget,
Yeah, indie stuff.
we're gonna split the revenue when the game comes out, but otherwise I can only pay you like this much per week and stuff like that. And for me, it wasn't really about the money. It was just, hey, here's another chance to do a fun creative project with a acquaintance that I met online. And I said yes. And then that was around the time I was doing all this YouTube freelance. That was kind of my focus. But then as time went on, we all started having to take on more responsibilities and kind of wear more hats. So he was like, okay, can you help out with, the production management? Then he asked me, oh, do you want to be the writer of Rhythm Doctor? Do you want to help
Oh,
me and you'll write all the dialogue and help me write the story? And I was like, sure, because he knew that I used to write comics, so he kind of trusted me with that.
hmm.
Then as we had more people, it was like, okay, so someone needs to help manage the payroll. Someone needs to, look at the finances. Somebody needs to, reach out for all these different things. And I just kept saying yes to all these things because most of us just kept saying yes because like, yeah, sure, nobody else is going to do it. I'll do it. And then like kind of with not wanting to admit that I'm a game developer, this whole idea that I'm like a manager or co-lead, that was also like
Yeah.
kind of a recent, I was like, they're like, yeah, you like help lead the team. You're a co-lead. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like I had to like, redo my business cards to say like, it used to say like artist and writer. And now I'm like, oh, I'm like a co-lead of the company because I help, as it got bigger and bigger, now I help run the company.
Yeah, that's amazing. Was there any particular hat that was hardest for you to put on or, skill to get acclimated to?
I think for the three of us who kind of run the team, Hafiz, Yakumo, and myself, like none of us went to school for like business or management. We're all kind of coming at it from our passions. So we really had just had to like learn anything business management related on the fly as it was happening. From like a technical side and a financial side, but also just like the human side, which I think is what I've kind of taken from it the most, which is that like every person you're collaborating with is a human being who is having a good day or a bad day, and I'm a human being that's having a good day or a bad day, and
Mm,
every part of the game is coming from that human place of like, what's a talent that you have or interest you have, or maybe one day you just got really in the zone and you made this totally cool feature for the game that wasn't planned, or maybe this other day, you weren't having a good month and weren't able, all these kind of things. That was kind of the hardest kind of growing pains of it, was like, this isn't just for fun anymore. Now, like, there's money on the line and like
yeah.
there's eventually deadlines and stuff like that. So now you have to find the best way to manage both yourself and keep yourself productive and then also like keep the progress of the game flowing consistently.
Yeah, it seems like such a hard thing to balance, sort of the organizational side and the creative side that doesn't want to be tamed.
Yeah, and for years we were pretty resistant to making it more strict or more kind of formalized. We all worked very casually, talked to each other very casually, and we didn't want to be strict or make anyone feel like they had to do X, Y, and Z task by next Monday or anything like that. So like we
Mm,
kept it very, very loose for a very long time. Hafiz is pretty passionate about not crunching, not making the team crunch, and a lot of that has to do with not promising um not promising dates publicly.
mhm.
People ask us all the time like, "Oh, when's this update going to come out? When's this going to be added?" We've always been pretty passionate about not making promises because if you make promises publicly, now you have to crunch because now you have to tell the
Yeah.
team, "Hey, it has to be done by Friday." So we were pretty resistant. We didn't even do meetings until like last year, 2024. We started doing like actually like voice meetings and stuff like
Oh,
that. I mean, where the whole team is like spread across all the time zones, so finding a time that worked for everybody was almost impossible.
sure.
So we kind of we resisted a lot of these kind of formal elements of a company for a very long time because it wasn't working for us, and we were like, oh, the more casual we keep it, the more passionate everyone will be. But eventually, there's so many moving parts and so much on the line that it's like, okay, now we need like a plan. Now there has to be like a schedule. Now there has to be meetings. We've kind of slowly introduce those things. I'm sure if we could go back, we would do things differently, but all of us always wanted to kind of treat everyone on the team with kindness and sort of a lot of people are working part-time, so they also are either finishing university or they have a job or stuff like that. So we don't want anyone to feel like they have to drop everything.
Yeah.
But when eventually there's a deadline, like, oh, this game's coming to Steam on the 21st or something like that, suddenly, it gets a lot more real.
Yeah. And yeah, speaking of real, this game, as you were saying, Hava started development like 13 years ago, and it's getting close to launch. So, how has the game changed in that time?
Yeah, it's a very unusual situation of like a game, this type of game kind of quote unquote taking this long. It's really not,
Mm,
a lot of other developers I talk to don't really have an experience like this. But I guess just because it was a slow transition from, a free Flash game made as a hobby, then, sort of starting over and being like, we're going to make the Steam version. Then we released into early access, and Rhythm Doctor's been in early access since 2021. And now, finally, in 2025, on December 6th, we're going to have the 1.0 full launch. It has changed a lot. Obviously, in terms of the amount of stuff in the game, the amount of levels and
mm,
things like that. It's a rhythm game, so it's mostly focused on like having to make new songs and then make the sort of the level design for that song and stuff like that. And, obviously, I would say the main way that it has changed is that it's just gotten so much more ambitious than it was at the start. When it first started as a Flash game, it was just kind of this silly thing with like four levels in it where it's like, oh, it's a one button rhythm game. All you need is your space bar, and you press the space bar when the beat kind of comes down the sort of like patient EKG line. You're a doctor, it's their heartbeat. You have to press it on the seventh heartbeat. Um, and it had this very loose, sort of hobbyist feel to it. But then when we started making it for Steam, we started redoing some of the art or redoing some of the music, and then Havis brought me on because he was like, "Oh, we want to have like a connecting story that connects all this." So then I was helping him write the story, and as you sort of, there's the question of sort of making it more ambitious and polishing it. And another thing that was sort of happening, and I haven't really talked to anyone about this yet, not even not even Havis, but like the more decisions you make over time, the game kind of goes from being abstract to being more kind of literal.
Mm.
The Flash game was just like, oh, this patient, their heart's broken and they're sad, so now you have to sort of cure that. And this patient is an insomniac because their heart is beating too fast, you have to fix that. And it was all sort of free floating, disjointed, totally abstract, kind of like jokes and gimmicks and stuff like that that kind of stood on its own. But then when you want to make it this like cohesive project with like a story that connects all of it, you start having to ask a lot of questions of like, okay, so like, is the hospital a literal place? And is this like a literal job? And do the patients have feelings in between the levels? Do they have like opinions and thoughts and relationships with each other? How do they know that you're there pressing the space bar? What do they think about that? Like we had to start answering all these questions, which slowly turned the project into a very different thing. Our inspirations, Hafiz's inspirations towards the beginning were kind of Nintendo series like Rhythm Heaven, if you've heard of that, or
Oh yeah.
WarioWare. And those are very abstract and kind of, there's not really like a serious lore to them or anything like that. But now, many years later, we're like sitting down with all these like story documents being like, okay, this character's relation to this character, and this is gonna change. They're gonna have a character arc because this level, we had to kind of stitch it all together. And that was one of the first things that when I was brought on as the writer, I had to do, which is that they had all these levels and songs kind of already made. And because they taught certain concepts and the difficulty got harder, there were certain ones that had to be in a certain order. But there were some that could be moved around. And he basically was like, all right, Kyle, can you write a story that like threads all of these random levels together? And I was like, this is really difficult. And hopefully,
Wow.
it comes across as seamless when you play it. But I was like, had to have all these conversations about like, okay, well, if we really want to tell a story that's going to emotionally resonate, then we have to set this up earlier on, and then we have to pay it off here. And that just kind of transformed it into a totally different, ambitious thing than it was when it started.
Wow, that's really incredible how you fleshed it out and you took, yeah, this very kind of cartoony inspired thing and brought uh reality to it.
Yeah, and once we released into early access, everything became much more real and kind of solidified because now it's out in the world, and then the game did pretty well when it launched, and it has like this sort of fan base of people who are drawing fan art and writing fan fiction and talking about their favorite levels, talking about their favorite characters. And now, like, then it suddenly starts feeling like everything is kind of set in stone. It's like, oh, well,
Mm.
we can't like scrap it now and totally change it because it's all these people's favorite, moment in the story or these people's favorite character. So I think that made us all start looking at it a different way. It was like, okay, now we have like a responsibility to the audience of like, they care about these character arcs and they care about what the game will explore and stuff like that. And now that kind of raises the bar for what the writing has to be and raises the bar for what the animation and the art has to look like. So kind of bit by bit, that ended up sort of making us approach it in a much different way.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that must be like a hard part of early access is, you're going into it with the intention of, okay, I'm getting feedback, I'm going to make revisions. But
Yep.
if something really resonates with people, it's like, okay, I'm locked into that. We cannot change that.
Yeah, you kind of hope that the early access label, like the point of it is to warn everybody anything in this could be changed at any
Mm.
time. But, when people get really attached to it, or you do what we did and you kind of hang around in early access for a long time, you start to feel like, okay, certain things are kind of foundational to what people like about it. And when they tell their friends to play it, this is why they're telling them to play it. We can't go back and change that now. We have to kind of build the train track as we're going, and we have to use what was already there in some sense to kind of build what we're kind of going towards.
Mm. And as you were saying, the library of songs in the game got pretty huge. and a lot of them have over 1 million views on the YouTube channel, which is incredible. How did
Yeah,
you sort of form such, get together with such a talented group of artists?
yeah. So I don't have like the exact ratio, but a lot of the song music is written by Hafiz and
Oh, really?
is written with the level design in mind. So he kind of approaches each level as a level designer, game designer, and a composer at the same time. And he's sort of writing the songs specifically to be fun in Rhythm Doctor and
Wow.
specifically to tutorialize these different mechanics. Because the mechanics in the game essentially are just rhythm concepts in music. So when he wants to teach something, he has to write the song in such a way that it highlights that rhythm and kind of slowly teaches it. But we have reached out to other musicians, kind of the further we've gotten. But the majority of it is kind of helmed by Hafiz very, very specifically, which is also kind of a quirk and a disadvantage of our team. Other rhythm games, do all licensed music, and it's just essentially you reach out to all these musicians, you come to an agreement, you sign a contract, you pay for it, then you have the rights to put the song in your game, and we do that on occasion. But a lot of our levels have to be kind of bespoke, tailored to the gameplay that we want, the gameplay and the story that we want to tell.
Yeah.
So a lot of the reason why we've been in early access so long is because we really have to start every song from scratch, knowing, okay, this is the game mechanic we want to teach, and this is the story that we're setting up. We're going to write a song specifically to serve that purpose, specifically to be a fun level, and then we got to do it all again for the next level. So, like, there's probably other rhythm games that could have developed much quicker than we do, but we've always had sort of a quality over quantity philosophy, which I don't think is always the correct way to go. I think embracing quantity and kind of like making like a streamlined process and adding a lot of content to the game because that's what people want. I think that's also fun too. But because we decided we wanted to like have this very polished, specific story with these specific challenges, we've had to go really, really slowly on a lot of these levels because it's all just built kind of brick by brick.
Hmm.
We can't just reach out to a musician and license a whole album and then have like 8 new levels in the game. We really have to like craft them the same way that you would craft like a platformer level or something like that. That's kind of what it feels like to me. Is like you can't just import, a bunch of levels into Mario or something like that. You have to kind of build it piece by piece, and that's what we do.
Yeah. No, that must be completely different. And yeah, with games with like a huge library of songs, it's kind of like you're just going in any particular day, playing one song, and then dipping, and there's no connection. But if you have too many songs in a story-driven game, probably not everyone's going to see them because you're committing hardcore to the path.
Right, exactly. And then, something that we did do on both of our games that kind of helped them sort of blow up is that we did include custom level editors so that people could
Right.
make their own levels and import their own audio and then share it. So that kind of gave both of the games kind of the jolt in the arm that let them have an audience because while people are waiting for us to make stuff, they could just make their own stuff and share it with each other on like Steam Workshop or just like literally passing zip folders to each other that have levels that they've made using the same tools that we use. We pretty much, once we finished making the level editors, we just used our own level editor to make the game
Really?
ourselves. Yeah.
That's so
We have
cool.
we have a couple of features that are sort of secret that, only developers
Uh-huh.
can touch, but other than that, it's completely the same thing and we just made the tools as good as possible so that we can make levels faster. And that's the same tools that everybody else is now using who plays the game.
Wow. Yeah, so everybody kind of has the keys to the kingdom. That's
Yeah, and
yeah.
that created its own problems because once for both games, when people started getting really good at making levels, they were making levels that were better than our levels. Like they're flashier or more kind of intricate, or they're appealing to a different sort of slice of the audience that wants harder levels. And on both games, I've had to really kind of struggle with the idea of like, now that fans are making levels that are quote unquote better than ours, or they're sort of polished in a different way, I'm like, now how do I, as an artist or a writer, kind of carve out my own niche of like,
Yeah.
here's how I'm going to contribute, or how sort of the official developer levels are going to be appealing in their own way that maybe you don't get from the community levels. But it really kind of raised the bar of everything. And on Rhythm Doctor specifically, like we have had to kind of one up ourselves and come up with new surprises that can't be done in the level editor so that these sort of official levels still are kind of delightful and surprising and kind of make you go, "Oh my God, didn't know the game could do that."
Yeah.
So we've had to like program whole new things from scratch just to kind of stay one step ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, no, I remember fairly recently there was an interview with the director of the recent Sonic games,
Hmm.
and that community is constantly making fan games and content. And he
Yes.
was asked about that, and he said that's a source of inspiration for us. We look at all the fan content, we're like, this is the benchmark that we have to beat. We have to find ways to surprise them.
Yeah, that's exactly how we feel. Like, once you see what everyone else can do with the same tools, like now it's like, okay, we either need to use these tools in an unexpected way, or we have to make new tools and, do things that they couldn't do before. It kind of reminds me of when like Super Mario Maker came out.
Yeah.
People started asking like, well, are they ever going to make a 2D Mario again? Because people have used these tools in so many permutations. Who knows if they'll even be interested in making a 2D Mario again, or if they would ever be able to surprise us. And I think, they did what you would expect, or what same thing that we're doing when they made Mario Bros. Wonder, which is like
Yeah.
they just have to start from scratch and make something new that couldn't be made in Mario Maker with new mechanics and new surprises. And it really, if they hadn't made Mario Maker, maybe they wouldn't feel that pressure to have to one up themselves.
Mm.
But now that they kind of gave everybody the keys to the kingdom, now it's like, okay, next time we make a Mario, we have to do something totally different because otherwise, what's the point?
And that's what they did, and it was really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So, one of the things I've always wondered about rhythm games, and you can kind of uniquely speak to this, is that with artwork and animation for a rhythm game, how do you balance it, keeping it appealing without being too distracting from the core gameplay?
Yeah, so we definitely have to take everything from like a clarity first perspective. If the people can't understand what they're doing, then it can't be in the level. There's just full stop. Um, so there's ways you could do that with like sort of testing the contrast, making sure that the UI elements in the foreground are standing out against the background, stuff like that. But then the funny thing is, with our games, a lot of the challenge is from intentionally trying to distract them and intentionally trying
Mm.
to mess them up with the visuals. We really want people to be kind of using their ear and feeling the beat internally, um, as opposed to a game like Dance Dance Revolution or Guitar Hero, where the visuals are completely mandatory. You could play Guitar Hero with your television muted, but you can't really play Guitar Hero with the TV turned off.
Yeah.
Um, and for Rhythm Doctor, we started leaning into that so much that we started hearing from players who are actually blind or visually impaired in real life saying like, "Oh, this game is really fun. Can you
Wow.
can you just like change this thing with the menu? I'm having a hard time going through the menu." So then halfway through, once we entered early access, we started to have a new creative constraint or a new goal that we wanted, which is that we want the whole story mode of the game to be playable by blind players start to finish, no visuals required in any way, as long as you have like a screen reader on your computer that could read the text. So that became, we had an initial constraint, which is that you only need the space bar, and Hafiz sort of dug his heels on that and was like, okay, this is going to be the premise of the game. You always just use the space bar. It's not like Guitar Hero where you have five buttons or any other
Yeah.
complicated controls. And then a new creative constraint would be like, okay, you have to use just the space bar and you have to be able to play the levels with no sight whatsoever. So that creates certain restraints of what you can do, but it also opens up the visuals in a way that like now we can make visuals that totally try to screw with you because, technically you're not supposed to be getting distracted by that. And, even a sighted player might have an easier time on certain boss levels if they like close their eyes for a few, moments of the level. So that kind of makes the visuals almost just like a canvas for us to have fun with, as long as the main gameplay is sort of digestible and understandable. We can purposely try to screw with the player. We can like totally glitch out the screen. We can have like
Mhm.
the everything kind of fly all over the place. We have a particular level in the game that people really like. That's our second boss level, where the game will go from full screen to a small screen, and then the actual game window will dance around your desktop. If you have
Oh.
multiple desktops, it'll jump from monitor one to monitor two and do a dance and sort of flow to the music. A lot of our Steam reviews are people who get to that level and then they rush to Steam and they're like, "Oh my God, the second boss was so crazy." So we have just been trying to one up ourselves with those types of things,
Yeah.
like totally glitching out the screen, having the game hide from you, have it like jump off your monitor and hide for a while and come back and do all these things to hopefully, make you laugh or make you feel kind of engaged and surprised.
I love it that, yeah, it's intentionally screwing with the player.
Yeah.
But also, it's so wonderful that you're able to provide just as fun of an experience to blind players.
Yeah, we kind of like unintentionally fell into this sort of accessibility realm, even just from the fact that it only uses the space bar. Games with simple controls kind of are available to people with a very wide range of disability,
Yeah.
because they can use whatever control they want. They only have to press one button. So that already kind of opened the door completely on accident. That was not like something we set out to do. Hafiz was really just trying to avoid that sort of Guitar Hero, uh, Dance Dance Revolution type thing where the controls can get very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make something that didn't do that. And that was very inspired by the Nintendo series Rhythm Heaven, which only uses one or two buttons depending on the game. And that kind of taught him that, like, okay, you can make a rhythm game without having to do the Guitar Hero model. You can do a game where the timing is really exact and the types of rhythms and the sort of rhythm theory that it's playing off of is much more complicated. And you can like pull from jazz and swing and dubstep and all these things,
Mm.
but just keep the controls really accessible. So that paired with the reliance on audio cues, and then us making the decision, okay, we are not going to have any mandatory visual cues in the game at all. Nothing in the game can happen without having some sort of option for an audio cue that's going to tell you that it's happening. Then we sort of were like, okay, now we are now we've have this new goal of trying to champion accessibility in the game, and we've gotten lots of really positive feedback from that. And blind players who, could play just like everybody else and talk about the game with other people and have favorite levels and all that stuff. And that really kind of was motivational for us being like, oh, maybe this, idea is kind of bigger than we even thought that it was.
Yeah. That's incredible. And another part of your work is on the PR side, which I've definitely heard from indie developers is one of the hardest parts of development. So, how have you approached that angle?
Yeah, you asked me earlier what the hardest hat to put on. I guess I forgot about this hat. It can be difficult. Sometimes it's completely mundane and boring, and there's not really anything going on. I don't know. We could talk about sort of marketing later, but
Yeah, sure.
I'm talking more like PR and community management, sort of like putting out fires and stuff like that. When you get a community of a certain size and it's strangers talking to each other on the internet about your
Mm,
game, drama and other conflicts can sort of arise
yeah.
either about content in the game directly or about stuff that people have made with the level editor or just, people butting heads within the community. And, we used to be really hands-on about that and really kind of involved. We were sort of we didn't sort of set out to make a Discord server on our own. We sort of teamed up. There was like a fan server, and then they kind of let us, become admins, and we sort of were working on that. And that fan server started getting really large, like
Oh,
thousands of people, more than 10,000 people, more than 20,000 people. Um, and that got really overwhelming for us to have to keep an eye on all the time. And eventually we had to just decide, hey, we're gonna like have a clean split from this Discord server, let the fans have it, and then we're gonna start our own Discord server that we can kind of keep smaller and keep more kind of professional. Um, but yeah, it's hard, and I think probably any developer runs into this, but I think there is something particularly about rhythm games where like it appeals to a very it appeal to a variety of people. It can appeal to people who speak different languages as their native language, and also I feel like we have a lot of fans who are teenagers. Like there's nothing in the games that appeals specifically to adults. So like
Right.
plenty of people are like, oh, I've been playing Rhythm Doctor since I was 8. I've been playing Rhythm Doctor since I was
Wow.
12. So like that introduces a whole other element to community management that I was not prepared for, which is that like the people in our audience are coming from a very, very wide spectrum of age, and
Yeah.
we're all interacting together, and we have to find a way to kind of get along and be nice and all this different stuff. So that's like a kind of sort of PR thing that we have to run into once in a while where there's people arguing, and it's like, okay, well, these people might be like 15, and this might be the only thing kind of going on right now, or they're stressed out from school, and then like that's sort of one aspect, and then like there's other aspects of like um right music rights. We ended up creating a system for our games on Steam Workshop where you have to get the musician's permission before you can post a level of their song. That's not how a lot of these rhythm games on the PC work.
Right.
Most of them are kind of like a Wild West. You could do whatever you want. And not shockingly, like there are musicians out there who are not kind of keen on that. And, I don't mean like Beyonce or, like Taylor Swift. I'm talking like indie musicians who make a living off of licensing their songs to rhythm games and like licensing their songs to indie games and stuff like that. And it's
Sure.
like, it's not cool by them that we might be spreading these levels that people make that, they didn't get the permission. So we really had to, there was sort of controversy about that. And we had to figure out what our statement on that was going to be. How were we going to handle it with the community? How are we going to handle it with the musicians? How could we find like a compromise that worked for everybody? So there was a period of time where I would just wake up and there was like a new fire kind of going on, and like I was like, okay,
Mm.
now we have to, we thought we were kind of staying low key and casual, but like
Yeah.
as more people know about this and get involved, there are more people whose interests and feelings are kind of involved. So, like I said, we kind of created this whole system of like, okay, you have to send this permission template email and they have to say yes. And if they don't say yes, you can't do it. And we created like a whole website to kind of track the permissions. And now there's like other indie rhythm developers who are like asking us for advice of like, oh, we want to do it the way you did it because we don't
Mm.
want to get, we don't want to step on anybody's toes. Can
Of
you give us
course.
advice on how we can set up a system of tracking the permissions and stuff like that? So we kind of became kind of accidental trailblazers in that regard as well, where it was like it was really just solving problems that were kind of arriving on the day and then having to make these kind of like long lasting decisions of like, okay, this is going to totally change the company's stance on this. And, you know, now there's people, asking us, oh, how should we do it? We have a game coming out on Steam, next month. Do you have advice? We made a level editor just like you did. And now we want to figure out, how to handle that from a PR perspective.
Wow, I can only imagine how tough that must be. I knew the community was passionate, but I didn't realize it was in like over tens of thousands, and especially that wide of an age range.
Yeah, and part of it was I want to say like, oh, it's because the game's amazing and that's
Sure.
why it's popular. And that is a part of it, but like the fact that both of the games originated on Flash sites in an era where a lot of people were playing Flash games, that was because they were free and in the browser that, attracted thousands of hits, to those demos, and that kind of gave us a bit of a leg up when coming to Steam, which is that we had like a little bit of an audience of people who either recognized the name of the game or were already talking about it. So that kind of helped us hit the ground running. And then when our game of Dance of Fire and Ice came out on Steam in 2019, it had sort of a quiet launch of like, okay, some people got it, some people are talking about it, kind of what we expected. But then it just started taking off on Twitch for a few weeks, especially with like Korean Twitch streamers, because our games are kind of localized in a bunch of languages, and
Yeah.
Korean Twitch streamers just loved this game, and then a different streamer would see that streamer, so then they would play it for their audience, and then another streamer saw that streamer, and it became this huge domino effect that like completely changed the course of the company. Pretty much, if I'm being frank, made it like feasible for me to do it full time and
Mm.
feasible for us to have like a bigger budget that we could hire other people because, it just sort of snowballed on Twitch and stuff like that. And that was awesome, but also, it makes the audience even larger. And now
Of
you have to
course.
be even more kind of careful about, what you're doing. And also just the like regular old stuff of people asking like, hey, when's the next update? Or hey, can you add this feature? Can you add multiplayer? Can you do this? Then you have to start fielding all those requests and deciding what's your response going to be? Are we going to promise anything? But we also have that philosophy of not making promises so that we don't have to crunch and sort of like
Yeah,
weighing our sort of internal philosophy with letting the audience know that we're going to keep supporting these games and add all their favorite features and stuff like that.
totally. That's a very similar to story to what happened with Among Us, where
Yeah.
that got really big on Korean Twitch streaming, and then it became big globally, and it changed the course of Innersoft.
Yes, and I don't want to compare
Of
ourselves to Among
course.
Us because I'm sure it's a completely different scale
Yeah.
of sales. But when, our game came out in 2019 and then Among Us was technically already out, but it blew up in 2020. When I saw that happening, it was extremely kind of relatable.
Mm,
I'm like, I bet I know what the team is feeling and talking to themselves, privately, because we went through a very similar experience on a different scale, but like very sudden, unplanned, and then you have to sort of pivot like, okay, now we have to talk publicly a different way, but also just like now we have to support the game. Like we are still updating Advanced Fire and Ice in 2025 because
wow.
people keep getting the game, so we're kind of like it's kind of the backbone of, funding Rhythm Doctor and funding future projects. So like
Hmm.
when you have that sort of Among Us moment, it's like, okay, now we have to add a bunch more content. Now we have to figure out what's like the long-term goal of this. My when I was sort of even though I did that student competition, my sort of leaning was always towards Rhythm Doctor. I liked Rhythm Doctor a little bit more as a game. And I thought that Rhythm Doctor was the one that had the potential. I was like, yeah, making a Steam version of Rhythm Doctor that makes sense to me. I felt confident that people would like it, that it would be sort
Hmm.
of acclaimed and stuff like that. But then once I was brought on to do things to Rhythm Doctor, Havis and Yakumo had said like, "Hey, we're going to finish up A Dance of Fire and Ice, the student jam version, and we're going to turn it into a game on Steam, and we're going to sell it. So we're going to kind of take a break for Rhythm Doctor for a little bit and finish this game up, and then this will actually be our first game on Steam." And I was like, "Yeah, that makes sense." But for me, I saw it mostly as like a practice run. I was like, "Oh yeah, we should get like a practice run on releasing a game on Steam, so you kind of learn the process and." Make mistakes and trip and fall. And then when we make Rhythm Doctor, which I considered like that was our real game, I was like, then we'll have all this practice. So I was like, yep, sure, I'll, do some more art and we'll like finish this up. And then, A Dance of Fire and Ice became kind of the more popular thing and kind of like the main attraction for a lot of people. And then as a company, we kind of had to decide like, okay, I guess we're gonna keep making both of these games at the same time because we have this Venn diagram of players of some who are there for A Dance of Fire and Ice and some who are there waiting for Rhythm Doctor, and now
Hmm.
we're passionate about both, so we
Yeah.
now need to like divvy up the tasks and hire more people and try to do both at the same time.
Wow. That's a lot. But I guess shifting to something smaller, I
Sure.
know in addition to both those projects, on the side you have some of your own personal projects. I saw some of your stuff on itch, like the Arena RPG, Tower of Modula.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so this was kind of once I finally embraced that I guess I'm a game developer, I'm a part of this, this is what I do and this is the connections I make and this is where my passion really is. I at this point I couldn't imagine working for Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or any of those things. That's not
Mm,
really where my sort of my fire of passion is at this point. Now I'm kind of totally into games. I was like, well, I should start making my own things on the side, participate in game jams on my own. Sometimes I like work on story games, like text-based games and Twine, and then I started learning RPG Maker as a software because I don't know any coding, so I need software that is very light on coding.
mm-hmm.
So I started this project Tower of Modula, which is an RPG, very like combat focused turn-based RPG, and that is just like I've been working on rhythm games now for so many years, like almost 10 years. I'm like, I need to do something that's not a rhythm game for a second just to kind of express myself and explore a totally different thing. And, after Rhythm Doctor comes out, who knows? Maybe we'll make another rhythm game. Maybe we'll do something else. But I'm like, I have a passion for RPGs and all these different things, so I want to try to explore that on my own. And it was also very important for me to have projects where I do it by myself because as someone who was sort of taken on to these rhythm games as an artist or a writer or PR, I always felt like I'm important, but like at the end of the day, I'm in a technical sense more replaceable or like
Yeah.
um I don't have full ownership over the game and it would be nice if there was other creative work I could do where it's like I can't rely on anybody else. I can't ask someone to program it for me or I can't ask someone to do the art for me or whatever. I will like buy asset packs and stuff like that if I need help. But like
Hmm.
having Tower of Modular where it's every decision is mine. If there's stuff in the game that is flawed or not fun, that's totally on me to fix it. It's just sort of like a completely different thing to tackle. Um, Having like the full creative freedom to do it how I want, but then also the full responsibility of everyone's reaction to it. If people think it's not fun, then like I have to go back to the drawing board and improve it. And that process of learning that and stumbling and then getting back up is like very, very satisfying. And like when I was doing all that freelance, I got really burnt out on being an animator and being an artist. And there were long stretches of time, and even including now, where I don't really draw for fun anymore. I don't animate anymore. I like just got super, super burnt out. I had to take like long breaks from it. And then starting this project, I was like, okay, we're gonna start small. If you want to draw stuff for it, you can, or if you want to buy an asset for it, that's fine. And then like just kind of like start a new skill or a new hobby from scratch. And that's just been really, really satisfying for me.
Totally. Yeah. When you've something that's sort of purely yours and you're involved in every part of it, I know from doing the show that it's fulfilling, especially when you're doing freelance or working for a company or something like that.
Yeah, it's like your baby, and like
Yeah,
if it succeeds, you can be proud of it, and if it, doesn't succeed, you can change it, or like it's totally. There's a lot of things in the world that aren't within our control, so I think
exactly.
having projects that are within your control and you can just be happy with the process and happy with whatever the result is, I think like we should all be doing that.
100%. Well, I think that is an awesome note to end on. So, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I have to ask, this is the Pixel Pizza podcast. Kyle, where is your favorite pizza place?
So are you also from New York?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm from Long Island. So
Okay. My
I'm
dad
sure,
was from Long
yeah.
Island.
So as New Yorkers, I'm sure a lot of us have a preference for New York style
Of
pizza.
course.
So on Long Island, there was a place called Emilio's near where I lived, it was like an Italian restaurant in the back, and then in the front, it was like quick New York style pizza. So if you didn't want to sit down, you could just get a slice. So Emilio's near my hometown where I grew up initially, that was probably my favorite. But now I live in California where New York style pizza is a little harder to come by. So now I
Hmm.
just there's a chain on the West Coast called Mountain Mike's. If I want pizza, that's where I go. And for me, that's like a totally different genre of food. There's like New York pizza, and then there's like general American pizza. And I don't like try to compare them. I just am like, oh, that's
Yeah.
a totally different thing. My parents are like, how could you eat pizza outside of New York? I'm like, well, I treat it as a different food. I get different
Yeah.
toppings on it, and I don't try to compare them.
Different standards.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know. Yeah. I also moved out west to California. I mean, I don't know Mountain Mike's. You're probably in a different part. I'm in
Yeah.
LA. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I'm in the northern
Okay.
California.
Yeah. But it's not the same.
No, and when I visit New York, I get a New York slice, and I'm
Oh, of
like,
course.
this is a type of food I haven't had in a year. Like,
Exactly. It's the taste buds are so relieved.
yes, exactly.
So, where can people keep track of you and your work?
Yeah, best place to follow me is probably Kyle Labriola on Blue Sky. Other than that, has links to everything else. I run a blog and I have my itch.io page, and then other than that, just following Rhythm Doctor on Steam and follow everything we do on there. Like I said, December 6th, we'll finally close the book on at least one chapter of us making rhythm games, and that's going to be really exciting. So you can look up Rhythm Doctor and follow us anywhere on there.
Great. Well, go check them out, everybody. Very excited for the game in December. And now we are going to be hearing one more track from our chiptune artist of the week, PICE, and that is called Reminisce. So enjoy that, and we will see you next week with another new Pixel Pizza.
Peel.